Hello, and welcome to MedTech Frontiers. I'm Jody Scott, and I'm joined by my colleagues Suzanne Levy-Friedman and Will Henderson. We are with the law firm of Hogan Lovells in the medical device and technology practice. This series spotlights the pivotal forces shaping the medical device industry in 2025. Regulatory shifts, political developments, and strategic trends are all converging in ways that will impact the industry. Just a reminder, as with any discussion involving regulations or administrative policies, when politics are involved, there is a tendency to take a side. Our goal is to present topics and discuss these issues as objectively as possible. Nonetheless, to the extent that it appears that a position is being taken, please note that it does not reflect the views or positions of Hogan Lovells. Let's get started, and let me ask you, Will, to kick us off by introducing yourself, and then let's move to Suzanne.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Jody. My name is Will Henderson. I'm a life sciences regulatory counsel at Hogan Lovells. Owing to a rather long healthcare career before I was an attorney, I actually have kind of a unique background, one that bridges and combines life sciences, law, marketing, corporate strategy, and technology, among others. In my role at Hogan Lovells, I counsel medical device companies on federal and even some state regulatory compliance issues. But a significant portion of my practice is dedicated to helping clients with their advertising and promotion issues. I truly enjoy leveraging my deep past industry experience to help our clients navigate an increasingly complex regulatory landscape and help them make informed and hopefully good decisions about how to promote their products. But I'll hand it to Suzanne.
Thanks, Will. So yeah, I'm also a counsel with our practice group, Medical Device and Technology. I'm based in the DC office, and I've been with the firm about 11 years. Like Will and Jody, I also counsel clients in their various interactions with FDA. I focus a good chunk of my time on pre-market strategy and submissions to FDA and answering FDA questions, but hand in hand with that goes a significant focus on advertising and promotion, all the way from pre-market, what types of claims do you want to be able to make, and how do we structure the submission strategy and pathway so that you'll be able to eventually collect the data you'll need to be able to make those claims and support them. And then post-market, obviously helping companies figure out what are we actually allowed to say based on what we got clearance or approval for, and how do we answer challenges that might come up. So like Will, this is something I really enjoy doing. I find that it's an interesting way to kind of put on my business hat in addition to my lawyer hat, and I hope to be able to continue to counsel clients in this space.
Excellent. So hopefully many of you were able to join our prior webinar, where Will and Suzanne gave an overview of the FDA requirements and expectations for advertising and promotion of medical devices. Today, we're following up on that session with a more interactive discussion about some of the activities we've seen the agency take in this space most recently, and some assessment of what we can tell so far about where this administration is headed in terms of ad pro enforcement. So Suzanne, let's get us started. What can you tell us about FDA's historic priorities in terms of advertising and promotion enforcement?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jody. So FDA is really widely respected as the public health agency. That's its first and foremost role. And I'd say it's actually respected that way, not just in the US, but globally as well. And so it really takes that role seriously. It unfortunately or fortunately doesn't have the resources to go after every single bad actor or unintentional bad actor. And so they do have to focus on those that are the most risk. And so that means that they basically focus on the violations that either implicate a patient safety concern or are the most widespread. So sometimes they go after an issue and they send a letter to everyone in the space who's taken that action and do it that way. And other times they'll send a letter to the actor that has the broadest impact and hope that everyone else falls in line by identifying their similarity to that situation. Now, what options do they have? They frequently take the first step as an untitled or it has come to our attention letter, which are non-public letters that are issued directly to the company involved. If that doesn't work, or if they perceive the violation to be particularly egregious, they may go straight to a warning letter. And then the ad pro issues also come up frequently during inspections, as well as in import reviews when things come in at the border. I will just cover really briefly a couple of the key themes we see because these are so important and we do expect them to probably continue. One is what we talked about, Will and I, are training a couple weeks ago, which is the general to specific policy, where manufacturers get a clearance or an approval for a very general indication, and then they try to make claims that go much beyond that to specific clinical outcomes. And FDA believes that that's not appropriate. The other area that we see a lot of enforcement in over the last decade is social media, right? FDA has the internet and Facebook and LinkedIn, just like everyone else. And it's an easy way to check in on what this company's attitude is to marketing and what types of things they're saying to the world about their products. And then the last thing that comes up a lot, and it came up a lot during COVID, and it still is cited in many, many letters, is when companies claim that they were FDA approved when they actually went through a much lower regulatory standard. And so FDA really does not like the impression being given that it's endorsed a product that went through a lenient review process.
So, Suzanne, you said that these are priorities that have been around for a long time and that you think that they will continue to apply. So, well, what do you think? Does the new administration change any of these priorities, or what do you think the impact's going to be?
Jody, that's a great question. It's kind of hard to say. It's certainly hard to predict the new administration and what all might happen. But I will say this. So historically, yes, we have seen an increase in enforcement when it's a Democratic administration. But if we look back at the first Trump administration, 2016 to 2020, we saw, yes, a dramatic decrease in the number of warning letters related to medical device companies, but there was a big increase in warning letters for drug companies. So I can't say I really know what's going to happen. I have noted that in the last 6 months, we have seen a number of warning letters be issued. The one thing I'll point to, though, as far as consistency, and that's no matter if warning letters go up or down or stay the same, something that will likely stay the same is FDA's priority on safety. And that's paramount to the agency. And so where we see enforcement, no matter how much of it there is, it's going to be because the agency perceives something that is the greatest risk to public health. And that's where we're going to see the activity. I guess another consistent thing that I think we have seen and we will continue to see is what shows up in those warning letters. If I were to pick the top two that I see all of the time, number one is a company that is marketing or promoting a device for an intended use or an indication for use for which they don't have clearance or approval. And that's something that FDA will strenuously object to every time they note it. The other one is a failure of the company to be truthful or to not be misleading. And you see that a lot where a company is perhaps omitting or minimizing the risks associated with their device, or they're overstating the benefits associated with the device. Those are areas that also often will show up in warning letters.
So I'm going to let you put away your crystal ball and let's talk a little bit about what we've seen since the new administration took office in terms of what the warning letter landscape is actually looking like.
So as I mentioned a moment ago, we have seen a number of them show up in the first 6 months of the new Trump administration. And we seem to see kind of a consistent emphasis on unauthorized device modifications, including software, which is interesting. And it falls into that first bucket that I mentioned a moment ago, where you're promoting a device without clearance or approval. Now, this is something that can come out of an inspection that FDA does, or it could come out of, say, FDA's review of the company website, which then often will result in an inspection. There's a great example that's very, very recent. It was DRG Instruments. It was a March 2025 warning letter, came out of an inspection of their facility in Germany. And DRG has an in vitro diagnostic that's saliva-based. It was originally cleared by FDA in 2005. Then back in 2017, they got a warning letter. And FDA issued that warning letter because it determined that the company was using a significantly changed technology as part of that device, in addition to promoting performance characteristics that weren't part of the initial clearance. So FDA said, hey, you have to get a new 510(k) clearance to continue marketing this device. 8 years later, FDA inspects the facility and no clearance. That's a big part of why they got the warning letter, but FDA continued. They also found another device that used that exact same technology that was being marketed by the company, the same uncleared technology, and it was being promoted as research use only. Now, typically an RUO or research use only device is exempt from FDA clearance or approval, provided it is solely promoted for lab research purposes, not for, say, clinical diagnostic purposes. But FDA looked at their website and noted that there were product descriptions and images and statements and even some performance claims related to patient types and ease of use and accuracy of detection that suggested it was being used diagnostically. They also looked at the labeling that was being shipped with the RUO product and found that there was patient specimen collection information in it. And then they looked at customer records, and they determined that the company had been selling to multiple companies that were in the business for performing clinical analysis. And there was no indication that any of those companies also conducted research. All of that added up to a strong totality of the circumstances impression to FDA that they were marketing this RUO device for clinical purposes. And as if that wasn't enough, they also had a few other infractions. They were doing things like they had a tab on their website that said FDA cleared tests, and there were a whole bunch of tests out there that apparently were not FDA cleared. And one of them was even indicated as now FDA approved, which is something that FDA takes exception to. In this case, it was a class 1 exempt device. So that's one great example. I have a feeling that Suzanne might have some other terrific examples to share, so I'd like to pass it over to her.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So there are actually three recent examples from February 2025, so also very recent, of companies making claims that FDA found to exceed the scope of their clearance. So not dissimilar to those that you raised, but again, seeing this same theme of FDA harping on you need to stay within the scope of your clearance. That is the fundamental rule of advertising and promotion, really, if I had to boil it down. So the first was a company called Red Oaks Instruments, where they had clearance for an instrument to measure hand strength, but they were promoting it for diagnosing mild traumatic brain injury, in other words, concussion, right? So that is a specific clinical outcome for a device that was cleared just for a functional claim of strength measurement. The second company was Exer Labs, and they had a device that they had deemed did not rise to the level of requiring a clearance. So they had listed it as 510K exempt, and it was for exercise rehabilitation and measuring of exercises. But they similarly were promoting it for screening, diagnosis, and treatment of neurological and musculoskeletal disorders. So FDA said these uses require additional data, and also they require clearance. You can't make those types of claims without submitting a pre-market file for our review. The other thing I'll note about these two particular examples is that they're in a subject matter area, a clinical area that both FDA and the Federal Trade Commission have focused a lot on, and I think probably will continue to focus on because, again, it's the patient safety concern. They both talked about neurodegenerative diseases, which is a space where you have a high potential of misleading vulnerable consumers who are desperate to kind of figure things out. And then the third letter that I'll mention briefly was issued to Next Science LLC, and this was in the wound care space. And FDA said similarly that the company was marketing products in excess of their clearances. So they had several clearances for different devices used in wound care, but they were making claims that FDA said went further than what they had been authorized to state. So these were things like compatibility with surgical implants, which usually requires very particular data, use in certain higher risk wound types, and other specific claims. FDA noted one particular claim about antimicrobial compatibility, where they said, if you want to keep making this claim, not only do you need a new clearance, but you might have to go get reviewed by the Center for Drugs. They also flagged with this company a factor that is an aggravating factor in many of their enforcement actions, where they said in one of your prior 510K reviews, we specifically identified one of these claims as something that would not be within the scope of what you currently have clearance to state. And then you turned around and made that claim anyway. So that type of thing really annoys the agency for obvious reasons. And the last thing I'll say about this particular example is that it really highlights the practical implications of this type of enforcement action. So the trade press reported that shares of Next Science dropped by about 13% shortly after the warning letter. So that's not an insignificant effect.
Well, great. That's quite a lot for the first few months of the new administration. What sort of lessons should we take away from all of this? Will?
I think one thing we can definitely rely on is that FDA enforcement will continue to be risk-based. And irrespective of how technology may change or the type of device, you're still going to see enforcement where the agency perceives the greatest risk to public health. And probably also another thing to take away is that if you got a warning letter, you should act on it, or when FDA comes back and inspects, you may anticipate getting another one.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would add that, the themes are going to stay the same, like Will just said. The subject matter might change, right? So we're probably going to see an increased focus, or a continued increased focus, I should say, on software and artificial intelligence, because that's a key area of innovation. And it's an area that FDA has been trying to wrap its head around and working on a lot these days. And so probably we'll see additional enforcement actions, both in terms of warning letters and other types of enforcement, where FDA feels that maybe the outputs aren't validated enough, or they're not providing enough information to the clinician. And then we might also see more import-export type activity, more holds at the border, given the increased enforcement under this administration, or the first several months of it, for things that are happening at the border.
Excellent. So, Will and Suzanne, thank you so much. This has been great. We hope you found this session interesting and informative, and we look forward to future discussions. We will weave in the latest on regulations, policies, and potential impacts on the medtech industry throughout this series. Thank you again for joining us. The conversation is only beginning.